"You don't belong here. People like you shouldn't be working on planes like this," shouted the arrogant woman, drawing the attention of every first-class passenger aboard Flight 447. She pointed her perfectly manicured finger directly at the middle-aged cleaning man in the worn gray uniform, adding with theatrical indignation, "Call the captain immediately. This old man has absolutely no business being in first class." But Margaret Williams had no idea that the cleaning man standing quietly before her was actually David Richardson, founder and chief executive officer of the very airline she was flying on. And at that precise moment, his phone's recording app was capturing every venomous word she spoke. In exactly 20 minutes, her entire life would be turned completely upside down in ways she never could have imagined. The transformation had begun at 4:45 a.m. that Tuesday morning in David Richardson's modest downtown Seattle apartment. For the 47th time in 4 years, he was preparing for what he privately called a reality inspection, an undercover mission designed to reveal the true character of both his employees and his customers when they believed no one important was watching or evaluating their behavior. Standing before his bathroom mirror in the pre-dawn darkness, David methodically transformed himself from a polished corporate executive earning 7 figures annually into an invisible service worker who would be ignored, dismissed, or worse, by the very passengers his company served. He selected his oldest, most worn clothing with deliberate care, a faded gray maintenance uniform with SkyHigh Airlines embroidered in thread that had seen better days, work pants bearing permanent grease stains that told stories of countless hours spent in aircraft hangars and maintenance bays, and scuffed black boots that looked like they had walked through every cargo hold in engine compartment and commercial aviation. The physical transformation was remarkable in its completeness, but the psychological shift was even more profound and disturbing. With each piece of working-class clothing David put on, he felt himself becoming invisible in the way that service workers had always been invisible to passengers who considered themselves more important, more valuable, more deserving of respect and recognition based solely on their economic status or social position. David Richardson had built SkyHigh Airlines from absolutely nothing 18 years earlier. Starting with the mortgaged house, borrowed money against his pilot's pension, and investments from 3 friends who believed in his vision, he had created what most industry experts said was impossible, an airline that consistently treated both employees and passengers with genuine dignity and respect, while remaining profitable and competitive in one of the most cutthroat industries in American business. Beginning with 3 aging Boeing 737s purchased from a bankrupt regional carrier and a dedicated staff of 27 employees who shared his commitment to excellence and human dignity, SkyHigh had grown into one of North America's most successful and respected airlines. They now operated over 200 modern aircraft, employed 15,000 people across 4 countries, and served destinations on every continent except Antarctica. More importantly for David, they had maintained an industry-leading reputation for exceptional service, employee satisfaction, and corporate integrity that had become legendary among both passengers and aviation professionals. But success and growth had taught David a harsh and uncomfortable lesson about human nature that he could never ignore. People revealed their true character only when they believed their actions would have no consequences, when they thought no one important was watching, and when they assumed they held all the power in a social interaction. Executives who were charming and respectful in boardrooms could become tyrants toward subordinates when they thought their behavior wouldn't be reported. Employees who seemed dedicated and professional during performance reviews could treat customers with indifference or even cruelty when supervisors weren't present. And passengers who demanded excellent service could treat the people providing that service with shocking contempt, disrespect, and systematic dehumanization.
Today's mission was Flight 447 from Seattle to Denver, a route that had been generating increasingly concerning feedback for 3 consecutive months. Passenger satisfaction scores were declining month by month, employee complaints were increasing at an alarming rate, and the company's Diversity and Inclusion Office had forwarded several deeply disturbing reports about discriminatory treatment affecting both staff members and customers from various backgrounds and age groups. David intended to discover exactly what was happening on this route, why his normally excellent service standards were apparently deteriorating, and what systemic issues might be affecting the corporate culture he had spent 18 years carefully building and protecting. He had learned through experience that the only reliable way to understand complex organizational problems was to experience them firsthand from the ground level, without the filtering, political considerations, and face-saving that inevitably affected information as it moved up through corporate hierarchies and management reporting systems. Armed with authentic maintenance credentials that he had obtained by completing the company's comprehensive employee training program, a professional cleaning cart borrowed from the overnight maintenance crew, along with all the proper supplies and equipment, and identification documents that would pass any security screening or background check, David made his way through Seattle-Tacoma International Airport as the morning sun painted the Pacific Northwest sky in brilliant shades of gold and deep crimson. The airport was already bustling with the familiar controlled chaos of early morning air travel that David had observed thousands of times throughout his career. Business executives clutched smartphones like lifelines while conducting urgent conference calls and rushing towards security checkpoints with rolling luggage and laptop bags. Families with young children navigated the complex maze of departure gates while managing strollers, diaper bags, car seats, and the inevitable stress that came with coordinating multiple people, conflicting schedules, and tight connection times. Vacation travelers moved more slowly but with obvious excitement, checking boarding passes, discussing itineraries, and taking photos to document the beginning of long-anticipated trips. Airline employees moved through all of this morning activity with the practiced efficiency that came from years of experience, their various uniforms marking them as members of the largely invisible workforce that kept the impossibly complex machinery of modern air travel functioning smoothly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, regardless of weather, mechanical issues, or the countless unpredictable challenges that arose in an industry where safety, timing, and customer satisfaction were all equally critical. David pushed his maintenance cart through all of this morning activity, immediately becoming as invisible as he had expected. Just another service worker preparing for another day of routine labor that passengers would never notice or appreciate. Travelers stepped around him without acknowledgement, their eyes sliding past him as if he were simply another piece of airport equipment, rather than a human being with thoughts, feelings, education, and decades of professional experience in aviation management. The psychological impact of this sudden invisibility was both fascinating and deeply disturbing to experience firsthand. David had encountered it during his early career as an actual maintenance worker, but revisiting it as an undercover CEO provided fresh insights into the social dynamics that shaped every customer service interaction and determined whether passengers treated airline employees with respect or contempt. Margaret Williams was the first passenger David noticed in Gate B12's waiting area, and everything about her appearance, behavior, and attitude immediately screamed wealth, status, and the kind of aggressive entitlement that came from decades of having her demands met instantly by service industries that prioritized her money over basic human dignity or employee welfare. Margaret was impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray business suit that probably cost more than most airline employees earned in an entire month of full-time work. Her hair was styled in a perfect bob that required weekly professional maintenance appointments, and her makeup was applied with the precision and attention to detail that came from daily practice and access to expensive cosmetics and beauty treatments. Diamond earrings caught the fluorescent terminal lighting as she gestured dramatically while talking on her phone, and her leather handbag prominently displayed the distinctive logo of a luxury brand that advertised exclusivity and superior social status as its primary selling points. "No, no, no," Margaret was saying into her phone, her voice deliberately loud enough for everyone within a 50-foot radius to hear and presumably be impressed by her apparent importance and business connections. "I specifically requested seat 2A when I made this reservation 6 weeks ago through my corporate travel department. I don't care what your computer system shows, and I don't want to hear any excuses about technical difficulties or booking errors. I have platinum status with this airline, and
means I expect and deserve the kind of preferential treatment that platinum status is supposed to guarantee." David continued his methodical cleaning routine, wiping down gate area chairs and emptying trash receptacles with the steady efficiency that maintenance workers developed over years of performing the same tasks. But his experienced ear caught every word of Margaret's increasingly aggressive conversation. His mental database, enhanced by 18 years of airline management experience, immediately provided Margaret's complete passenger profile. She did indeed hold Platinum frequent flyer status, Seat 2A was available and properly assigned to her reservation, and there were no technical issues, booking errors, or legitimate problems affecting her travel arrangements. This was clearly manufactured drama, either created to ensure she received extra attention and special treatment from gate agents, or designed to establish her social dominance over other passengers who might be listening to her public performance. It was a behavior pattern that David had observed and documented countless times during his undercover inspections, and it usually indicated deeper character issues that would likely manifest in other ways during the flight experience. The gate agent handling Margaret's complaint was Jennifer Thompson, a young woman whom David recognized as one of their newest hires, but someone who had already demonstrated exceptional potential during her training period. Jennifer had been with SkyHigh for only 8 months, but she had completed her comprehensive customer service training program with outstanding scores and had received consistently positive feedback from both supervisors and passengers throughout her probationary employment period. Watching Jennifer handle Margaret's unnecessarily aggressive approach with genuine professional composure and authentic patience impressed David enormously, especially considering the public nature of the confrontation and the psychological pressure that inexperienced employees often felt when dealing with difficult, entitled customers who seemed determined to create problems where none existed. "I completely understand your concerns and frustration, Miss Williams," Jennifer was saying in the calm, measured tone that all customer service representatives learned during their extensive training program. "Let me check our reservation system once more to verify all the details of your seat assignment and ensure everything is exactly as it should be. Yes, I can confirm that you are properly assigned to Seat 2A, which is a premium window seat in our first-class cabin with excellent views and all the amenities you expect. Is there something specific about that assignment that's causing you concern or dissatisfaction today?" Margaret's response was as predictable as it was theatrical and designed to maintain her position as the center of attention. "The concern is that I made this reservation with very specific requirements and explicit instructions, and now I'm being told that those requirements were never properly recorded, acknowledged, or guaranteed by your booking system. Do you have any idea what Platinum frequent flyer status actually means? It means I've invested over $50,000 with this airline in the past 12 months alone. It means I deserve significantly better treatment and more personalized attention than what I'm receiving right now." David made a mental note to commend Jennifer later for her outstanding professionalism under pressure, while also making plans to discreetly verify Margaret's actual spending history with the airline. In his extensive experience managing customer relations, passengers who made dramatic public claims about their financial investments in the company rarely provided accurate figures, and those who were genuinely high-value customers typically didn't need to announce their status to entire gate areas full of strangers. As boarding began for Flight 447, David wheeled his cleaning cart toward the aircraft, following the same carefully planned routine he had developed and perfected during 46 previous undercover inspections over the past 4 years. The strategy was elegantly simple in concept, but required complex execution. Blend seamlessly into the background as just another maintenance worker, observe passenger and crew interactions with scientific objectivity and detailed attention, document any issues, policy violations, or cultural problems, and then quietly disappear before takeoff to compile comprehensive reports for senior management, review, and action. He had successfully executed variations of this routine dozens of times without a single incident, discovery of his true identity, or compromise of his investigation mission. But as he entered the first-class cabin of Flight 447 and began methodically arranging his cleaning supplies and equipment, David immediately sensed something different and potentially volatile about today's flight. The psychological atmosphere felt electrically charged with tension and conflict, as if multiple strong personalities and incompatible worldviews were about to collide in an inevitable explosion that would test every system, protocol, policy, and value that his company had developed over 18 years of operation.
Margaret Williams was among the first passengers to board, sweeping into first class with the theatrical entitlement and overwhelming presence of someone who had never been denied anything she wanted in her entire life and couldn't conceive of a world where her desires weren't immediately and completely fulfilled by everyone around her, regardless of their own needs, dignity, or professional responsibilities. She settled into seat 2A with an elaborate performance of sighs, adjustments, critical observations, and loud complaints that seemed carefully choreographed to establish her importance and demonstrate her authority over everyone within earshot, including both fellow passengers and crew members who were trying to prepare the aircraft for departure. "This blanket feels unusually cheap and scratchy for first-class accommodations," Margaret announced to no one in particular, holding up the premium wool blanket that cost sky-high $42 per unit and was replaced monthly to maintain optimal softness, cleanliness, and comfort standards. "And the temperature in here seems completely wrong and poorly regulated. Don't the crew members know how to properly control cabin climate systems? I shouldn't have to ask for basic comfort and proper environmental conditions in premium seating that I've paid extra money to enjoy." David worked quietly nearby, methodically cleaning surfaces that were already spotless, while carefully observing the complex social dynamics that were beginning to unfold around him like a psychological case study in human behavior under stress. Years of experience conducting these undercover investigations had taught him that the key to successful observation was becoming part of the background environment, moving with obvious purpose and professional competence, but without drawing attention to himself, listening carefully to conversations and interactions without appearing to eavesdrop or gather intelligence, and documenting everything he witnessed without being obvious about the surveillance and data collection process. Other first-class passengers were settling into their seats with varying degrees of patience for Margaret's running commentary on everything from seat fabric quality to ambient lighting levels to the temperature and air circulation systems. Their reactions created a fascinating spectrum of human responses to antisocial behavior and public rudeness. Polite indifference from those who preferred to avoid conflict, barely concealed irritation from passengers who found her behavior offensive, obvious discomfort from travelers who were embarrassed to witness such entitled treatment of airline staff, and, in a few cases, the kind of moral outrage that suggested potential direct confrontation if Margaret's behavior continued to escalate. In seat 3B sat Robert Chen, a distinguished elderly gentleman who appeared to be a retired professor, academic researcher, or professional intellectual based on his demeanor, the scholarly book he was reading, and his patient, analytical way of observing the social dynamics developing around him. He had the thoughtful, measured bearing of someone who was accustomed to dealing with difficult personalities in intellectual environments, and David watched him occasionally glance up from his thick hardcover book to assess Margaret's behavior with the clinical eye of someone who had spent decades studying human psychology, social interactions, and group dynamics. Across the aisle, in seat 3C, was Thomas Patterson, a confident, middle-aged businessman whose expensive suit, quality leather briefcase, and assured posture suggested significant professional success in whatever field he worked in. Thomas kept shooting increasingly irritated and disapproving glances at Margaret each time she made another complaint or demand, his jaw muscles tightening in the telltale physical way that indicated someone fighting the internal urge to speak up and directly confront antisocial behavior that was affecting everyone around them. A complex calculation that most ethically minded people made when witnessing injustice or inappropriate behavior in public settings where intervention might be possible but could also create additional problems. In the front row, seats 1A and 1B, a young couple was attempting to get settled and organized while managing their 6-month infant and dealing with the incredibly complex logistics that came with air travel involving small children. The mother looked exhausted and stressed, probably from the early morning departure time combined with the inevitable challenges of navigating airport security procedures, gate changes, and baggage requirements while carrying a baby, multiple diaper bags, bottles, formula, toys, and all the other equipment that parents needed for successful travel with infants. The father was juggling multiple responsibilities simultaneously, trying to organize their extensive carry-on luggage in the overhead compartments according to safety regulations and size restrictions, attempting to set up the baby's portable seat and safety equipment according to FAA guidelines, soothing their infant, who was beginning to fuss as they eased into their seats.
To fuss and cry in response to the unfamiliar environment and sounds of the aircraft cabin, and managing his own travel documents and boarding materials while providing emotional support to his wife, who was clearly overwhelmed by the entire situation. David had witnessed this exact scenario hundreds of times during his years in aviation management, and he knew from experience that the next few minutes would reveal enormous amounts of information about the character, values, and moral priorities of everyone in the first-class cabin. How other passengers reacted to inevitable infant crying and disruption, how crew members balanced the competing demands and needs of different customer groups, and how entitled individuals like Margaret responded to perceived threats to their comfort and convenience would create a perfect microcosm of human behavior under stress and social pressure. The flight crew was beginning their pre-departure routine with the practiced efficiency and professional competence that came from thousands of flights and years of experience handling every conceivable type of passenger, weather condition, mechanical issue, and emergency situation. Sarah Martinez, the lead flight attendant for this route, moved through first class with graceful confidence and obvious expertise, demonstrating the delicate balance that excellent service required, being friendly and personable without becoming overly familiar or unprofessional, maintaining clear authority and control without appearing confrontational or rigid, and providing genuinely personalized service while adhering to standardized safety protocols and federal regulations. David had personally promoted Sarah to her current leadership position 2 years earlier after observing her exceptional customer service skills, professional judgment, and moral character during a similar undercover inspection on a different route. She possessed what he considered an almost intuitive gift for reading passenger moods and emotional states, adjusting her communication style and approach accordingly, diffusing potential conflicts and tensions before they could escalate into serious problems, and making every traveler feel valued, respected, and genuinely cared for regardless of their ticket price, frequent flyer status, personal behavior, or demographic characteristics. Sarah represented exactly the kind of employee that made David proud of the corporate culture he had spent 18 years trying to build and maintain at SkyHigh Airlines. Consistently professional without being cold or distant, genuinely helpful without being subservient or deferential, and unwavering in her commitment to treating every human interaction with dignity, respect, and authentic concern for passenger welfare and satisfaction. "Good morning, Miss Williams," Sarah said with genuine warmth and professional courtesy as she approached Margaret's seat, consulting her passenger manifest tablet to ensure she used the correct name, proper title, and appropriate level of personalized attention. "Thank you for choosing SkyHigh Airlines for your travel today. I see from our records that you're one of our valued Platinum Frequent Flyer members, and we certainly appreciate your continued loyalty and trust in our service. Is there anything specific I can help you with before departure to ensure you have the most comfortable and enjoyable flight experience possible?" "Yes, actually, there are several things that need immediate attention and correction," Margaret replied, her tone already carrying the sharp, critical edge of complaint and dissatisfaction, despite Sarah's perfectly professional, friendly, and accommodating greeting. "First and most importantly, I specifically requested a window seat when I made this reservation through my corporate travel department, but this doesn't feel like a proper window seat to me. The view seems partially obstructed by aircraft structural elements, and the window appears noticeably smaller than what I'm accustomed to experiencing in first-class accommodations on other airlines." Sarah checked her tablet with calm professionalism and obvious expertise, though David could see the slight confusion in her expression as she verified information that she already knew to be completely accurate. I can absolutely confirm that seat 2A is definitely a window seat according to our aircraft configuration, ma'am, and you are sitting in the exact correct location according to our reservation system. The window dimensions are completely standard for this Boeing 737-800 aircraft model, and you should have an excellent, unobstructed view of the landscape once we're airborne and at cruising altitude. Perhaps the angle seems different because of the forward galley wall configuration, but I can assure you that you do have complete and total access to the window with optimal viewing opportunities. Margaret looked around the cabin with exaggerated confusion, mounting irritation, and theatrical frustration, as if the basic laws of physics and aircraft engineering design had somehow been suspended specifically to inconvenience her and ruin her travel experience. Well, it certainly doesn't feel like what I paid for or what I was promised when I made this reservation. The window seems unusually small compared to other airlines I fly regularly, and I can barely see outside properly from this angle. This is definitely not the premium experience I was expecting, or the level of quality I've come to associate with first-class travel.
David suppressed a knowing smile as he continued his cleaning duties nearby, working with steady efficiency while listening to every word of the exchange. The windows on this Boeing 737-800 were manufactured to exactly the same specifications as windows on every other commercial aircraft of this model currently in service worldwide. The seat Margaret occupied offered one of the most desirable and unobstructed views in the entire first-class cabin, with excellent sight lines and optimal positioning for both takeoff and landing observations that most passengers found genuinely enjoyable and memorable. Margaret was engaging in a classic behavior pattern that David had documented extensively during his years of undercover research, establishing dominance and ensuring extra attention through manufactured criticism and artificial problem creation. She was systematically finding fault with objectively superior accommodations and service simply to demonstrate her importance, assert her authority over airline staff, and ensure that crew members would treat her as someone requiring special consideration and preferential treatment throughout the flight. This psychological strategy usually backfired with experienced flight attendants who had been trained to recognize manufactured complaints and artificial problems while still maintaining professional courtesy and high service standards. But it often succeeded in making other passengers uncomfortable and creating unnecessary tension and conflict in the confined cabin environment, where everyone was forced to coexist for several hours. As additional passengers continued boarding the aircraft, David noticed that Margaret's complaints and criticisms were becoming increasingly frequent, more personal in nature, and more broadly targeted at fellow travelers rather than just airline equipment, service procedures, and cabin amenities. She made loud, disapproving comments about the young couple bringing an infant into first class, suggesting audibly that babies should be restricted to economy seating, regardless of what their parents had paid for tickets or their reasons for choosing premium accommodations. She questioned whether Robert Chen had the correct boarding pass or was confused about his seat assignment, implying that elderly passengers might lack the mental capacity to handle the complexities of modern air travel or understand basic reservation systems. She even criticized Thomas Patterson's carry-on luggage, suggesting in a voice loud enough for other passengers to hear that his standard business briefcase was too large for overhead storage, despite it fitting easily into the compartment with room to spare and meeting all FAA size and weight requirements. Each comment and criticism revealed another layer of her prejudice, entitlement, and fundamental disrespect for other human beings who didn't meet her arbitrary standards or share her socioeconomic background. The atmosphere in first class was becoming increasingly tense and uncomfortable as other passengers tried to decide whether to ignore her behavior and avoid confrontation, speak up in defense of her targets and risk escalating the situation, or simply endure the toxic environment until takeoff, when normal flight protocols might hopefully limit her opportunities for public commentary and criticism.
David could see the stress and tension building in Sarah's posture and facial expressions as she tried to manage the rapidly deteriorating social dynamics without escalating the conflict, violating company policies about passenger treatment, or creating additional problems that might affect flight safety or departure schedules. He watched other travelers exchange uncomfortable glances, silent communications, and subtle facial expressions as they assessed their options for dealing with Margaret's increasingly antisocial behavior and its effect on everyone around them. But it was when Margaret finally turned her full attention and aggressive energy directly toward David himself that the situation escalated far beyond mere rudeness, social awkwardness, or typical passenger complaints into something much more serious, personal, and potentially devastating for everyone involved in the confrontation. David was cleaning the area immediately around Margaret's seat with the quiet efficiency and obvious professional competence he had learned during his years as an actual maintenance employee early in his aviation career. He was being careful not to disturb passengers or interfere with their settling-in process, moved with clear purpose and practiced skill that demonstrated years of experience, maintained appropriate, respectful distance according to industry standards, and followed all established protocols for service worker behavior in premium cabin environments. Margaret seemed to take his mere presence as a personal insult and direct challenge to her authority, as if the sight of someone performing essential manual labor was somehow offensive to her refined sensibilities and inappropriate for the exclusive environment she believed she had purchased access to with her first-class ticket.
"Excuse me," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the ambient cabin noise and conversations like a knife, causing David to look up from his work to make direct eye contact for the first time since the boarding process had begun. "What exactly do you think you're doing in here?" "Cleaning the cabin, ma'am," David replied with the carefully deferential tone he had perfected during his actual maintenance career years earlier, and that service workers throughout the industry learned was essential for avoiding confrontation with entitled, aggressive customers who were looking for reasons to assert their dominance. "Just completing the standard pre-flight cleaning procedures and safety checks before departure." Margaret's eyes narrowed as she subjected him to an intensive, hostile visual examination, studying his appearance, posture, and demeanor like a hiring manager evaluating a job candidate for fitness and competence, or a customs official searching for contraband and signs of deception. "How old are you?" The question seemed to come from nowhere and caught David completely off guard. In 46 previous undercover inspections, covering hundreds of passenger interactions and thousands of hours of observation, no customer had ever inquired about his age while he was working in his maintenance disguise or performing cleaning duties in passenger areas. The question appeared to have no connection to his cleaning work, his professional competence, aircraft safety procedures, or any legitimate concern about airline service quality. It was purely personal, and Margaret's tone made it clear that his answer would be used to make some kind of judgment about his fitness for employment, his right to work in the aviation industry, or his value as a human being. "I'm sorry, ma'am?" David responded, buying time while he tried to understand the motivation behind her inquiry and prepare for whatever direction this increasingly uncomfortable conversation might take. "I asked how old you are," Margaret repeated with growing impatience and obvious irritation at having to repeat herself. "You look like you should have retired from the workforce years ago, not crawling around cleaning commercial aircraft like someone half your age. This is clearly a job for younger people who have the physical energy, mental acuity, and stamina to do it properly without creating safety risks or compromising service standards." The casual cruelty and age discrimination in her assumption hit David like a series of physical blows to his chest and stomach.
He had encountered various forms of workplace discrimination during his long career in aviation, but this was the first time he had personally experienced systematic age-based prejudice as a direct target, rather than observing it happening to other people or reading about it in employee complaints and legal documents. "I'm simply doing my assigned job according to company procedures and safety regulations, ma'am," he replied, keeping his voice steady and professional, despite the anger, hurt, and moral outrage that were building inside him. "Well, your job and your presence here are making me extremely uncomfortable and concerned about flight safety," Margaret declared, raising her voice to a level that commanded attention from passengers throughout the first-class cabin and probably extending into the adjacent sections of the aircraft. "I don't want some elderly man with questionable physical and mental capabilities hovering around my seat while I'm trying to relax and mentally prepare for an important business meeting in Denver. Where is your supervisor? I want to speak to someone in management about this completely inappropriate situation immediately." Other passengers were beginning to stare openly now, and David could feel the weight of their attention as the confrontation escalated beyond a private disagreement into a public spectacle that was affecting everyone's travel experience. The young parents in the front row exchanged concerned glances, clearly uncomfortable with Margaret's aggressive tone and discriminatory implications. Robert Chen looked up from his scholarly book with obvious moral disapproval, his academic composure giving way to barely contained disgust at her behavior and treatment of a working person. Social authority and superiority over someone she perceived as being beneath her in economic status, professional position, and social hierarchy. "No, you absolutely don't understand the gravity and seriousness of this situation," she continued, her voice becoming progressively louder and more theatrical with each sentence as she played to her captive audience. "I have platinum status with this airline, which I earned by flying first class exclusively for 15 consecutive years and spending enormous amounts of money on premium travel. I know exactly what quality service looks like, and this," she gestured at David with obvious contempt and disgust, "is definitely not quality service. This is exactly the kind of declining standards and cost-cutting measures that are systematically destroying the aviation industry." The knot in David's stomach tightened as he heard his own company's Platinum Frequent Flyer program, a program he had personally designed, implemented, and continuously refined over the years to reward customer loyalty while ensuring respectful treatment for all passengers and employees, being weaponized as a tool of discrimination and systematic abuse against one of his workers. Margaret was using his own creation, his own policies and reward systems as justification for treating another human being with contempt and cruelty. The irony was devastating and personally painful, but it was also educational in ways that would prove invaluable for future policy development, employee training programs, and corporate culture initiatives. Sarah Martinez appeared at Margaret's side, drawn by the increasingly loud voices, the obvious distress of other passengers who were being forced to witness the confrontation, and her professional responsibility to manage passenger conflicts before they affected flight safety or departure schedules. "Is everything all right here? Is there something I can do to resolve whatever concerns you might have?"
"No, everything is absolutely not all right," Margaret snapped, turning her aggressive energy toward Sarah while maintaining the same confrontational tone and hostile attitude that had characterized her treatment of David. "I want this man removed from first class immediately and permanently. He's clearly too old and physically compromised to be performing this kind of demanding work safely. And frankly, his presence and appearance are making me genuinely nervous about flight safety, security protocols, and this airline's hiring standards." She paused dramatically, as if preparing to deliver the climax of an important speech or legal argument. Who knows what kind of background investigation, security screening, and competency testing you people actually conduct on your cleaning and maintenance staff? For all we know, he could be dangerous, unstable, or compromised in ways that put passengers at serious risk. David's hands stopped moving on his cleaning cloth as the full implications and malicious intent of Margaret's accusation registered in his mind. She wasn't just questioning his age, physical capabilities, or right to employment in the aviation industry. She was suggesting that his mere presence constituted a potential security threat to aircraft safety and passenger welfare. And she was doing it publicly, loudly, and with the apparent intention of humiliating him and driving him away from his work. The casual character assassination was breathtakingly offensive and revealed prejudices and assumptions that went far beyond simple age discrimination into territory that bordered on paranoid delusion and systematic dehumanization of working-class people based on their appearance, age, and perceived social status. Sarah maintained her professional composure and training despite the obviously unreasonable and potentially discriminatory nature of Margaret's complaints and demands. "Ma'am, I can absolutely assure you that all of our maintenance and cleaning personnel go through comprehensive background investigations, federal security clearances, and extensive training programs that meet or exceed all Federal Aviation Administration safety requirements and industry standards. This gentleman is simply performing his regularly assigned duties according to established company procedures and safety protocols." His duties? Margaret's voice rose to a volume that commanded attention from passengers throughout the entire aircraft and probably into adjacent gate areas where other flights were boarding. His duties are supposed to be cleaning toilets and emptying garbage cans in maintenance areas and service zones where premium passengers don't have to see him or be reminded of unpleasant realities, not hovering around first-class seating where people have paid extra money specifically to avoid this kind of unpleasant and inappropriate experience. The breathtaking cruelty, class prejudice, and systematic dehumanization of her statement hit David like a series of physical blows that left him momentarily stunned by their viciousness and comprehensive nature. In 2 sentences, Margaret had managed to reduce his work, and by extension, the essential labor of every maintenance and cleaning employee in the aviation industry, to something shameful, degrading, and literally beneath the notice of people who considered themselves superior based solely on their economic status. She had dismissed an entire category of essential workers as unworthy of basic human recognition, respect, or acknowledgement. She had suggested that their mere visibility was an unpleasant experience that premium passengers should be protected from witnessing. She had created a hierarchy of human worth based entirely on job classification and economic status, placing service workers at the bottom and treating them as less than fully human. David had been cleaning aircraft cabins, both as an actual employee earlier in his career and as an undercover CEO conducting organizational research for nearly 30 years combined. During that time, he'd encountered every conceivable type of passenger behavior, grateful appreciation from travelers who understood the importance of his work, polite indifference from busy people focused on their own concerns, occasional rudeness from stressed or frustrated customers, cultural misunderstandings based on language barriers or different expectations, and stress-induced irritability from people dealing with flight delays, missed connections, or personal crises. But he had never experienced such comprehensive, articulate, and publicly delivered contempt for working people. Margaret's verbal assault represented a level of casual cruelty and systematic dehumanization that revealed character flaws so profound and disturbing they bordered on pathological.
suggesting someone who had never learned to see service workers as fully human beings deserving of basic dignity and respect. David straightened slowly from his cleaning position, meeting Margaret's hostile gaze with the quiet dignity and moral strength that had served him well throughout his career in dealing with difficult people, corporate crises, and morally challenging situations where doing the right thing required personal courage and professional risk. "I understand that my presence is making you uncomfortable, ma'am," he said with calm authority and obvious self-respect. "I'll complete my assigned work as efficiently as possible and then move on to other areas of the aircraft according to my scheduled duties." "No, you don't understand anything about this situation or your place in it," Margaret declared with the righteous indignation and moral superiority of someone who believed she had been gravely insulted and was now justified in escalating her attack to whatever level necessary to establish her dominance. "You'll move on immediately, right now, not when you decide you've finished whatever menial tasks you think are so important." She turned to Sarah with the expectation of immediate compliance that came from decades of having her demands met without question or resistance by service industry workers who depended on customer satisfaction ratings for their employment security. "I want him removed from first class this instant. I don't care about his work schedule, his cleaning routine, or whatever management thinks is necessary. My comfort and the comfort of other premium passengers takes absolute priority over his employment responsibilities." Thomas Patterson, who had been listening to the exchange with mounting disgust and moral outrage, finally reached his personal breaking point and decided to intervene, despite the potential social awkwardness and confrontation that might result. "Ma'am, there is absolutely no justification for speaking to this gentleman in such a disrespectful and degrading manner. He's working quietly and professionally, following established procedures, and he hasn't done anything to warrant this kind of abusive treatment." Margaret whirled toward Thomas with the fury of someone who wasn't accustomed to being challenged, contradicted, or held accountable for her behavior, especially not from fellow passengers who she expected to automatically support her position and validate her complaints without question. "Excuse me?" she said with barely controlled rage and obvious shock at his unexpected intervention. "Are you actually presuming to tell me how I should behave and what standards I should accept? I'm a Platinum Frequent Flyer member who has probably invested more money in this airline this year than you earn in total annual salary. I don't need etiquette lectures from random passengers who clearly don't understand the service standards that premium cabin travel is supposed to provide." The assumption was not only insulting but wildly inaccurate. Thomas Patterson was actually a highly successful architectural consultant who designed major commercial buildings and frequently traveled first class on his company's expense account for project meetings and client presentations across North America. His annual income was probably comparable to Margaret's, and quite possibly significantly higher, depending on his project portfolio and client relationships.
But more importantly, his comment about courtesy and basic human decency had nothing whatsoever to do with economic status, professional achievement, or airline spending patterns. It was about fundamental moral principles and the basic obligation that all civilized people had to treat others with dignity and respect, regardless of their job, age, or perceived position in social hierarchies. Margaret's response revealed the deeply flawed and morally bankrupt belief system that drove all of her behavior and social interactions. She genuinely believed that human worth was determined solely by financial spending power and social status markers, and that anyone who challenged her authority must by definition be inferior to her in measurable economic terms. Robert Chen closed his thick hardcover book with a decisive thud that seemed to echo through the increasingly tense cabin atmosphere. He fixed Margaret with the stern, authoritative gaze of someone who had spent decades dealing with difficult personalities in academic and professional environments where intellectual discourse and moral principles were valued over wealth and status. "Young lady," he said in the measured, professorial tone that university instructors used when delivering important lessons about character, ethics, and social responsibility to students who needed guidance. Treating service workers with disrespect and contempt reflects very poorly on your character and upbringing, not on their professional competence or personal worth. Your behavior is genuinely embarrassing to witness and completely inappropriate for any social setting, but especially in a confined environment where other people are forced to endure your rudeness." "Young lady." Margaret laughed with bitter, sarcastic amusement and obvious offense at being addressed in such a manner. "I'm 43 years old, and I operate a successful business consulting firm that provides strategic services to Fortune 500 companies across multiple industries. I don't need condescending etiquette lessons from some elderly man reading a book, and I certainly don't need to justify my service expectations to passengers who obviously don't understand what premium cabin travel actually means or costs." The gratuitous insult directed at Robert was the final straw for several other passengers who had been watching the confrontation escalate with growing discomfort, moral indignation, and concern about the toxic atmosphere Margaret was creating for everyone on the flight. The young mother in the front row, who had been struggling with her own travel stress and infant care responsibilities while trying to ignore the confrontation, turned around with fire in her exhausted eyes and righteous anger in her voice. "Maybe you should try reading a book yourself," she said, with controlled fury and obvious moral conviction. "It might teach you some basic human decency and social skills that you clearly never learned. Your behavior is absolutely disgraceful, and you're setting a terrible example for everyone around you, including children who are watching how adults are supposed to treat each other." Margaret stood up abruptly from her seat, her face flushed with rage at the unprecedented resistance she was encountering from other passengers who she had confidently expected to support her position automatically and validate her complaints without question or criticism. The situation had spiraled completely beyond her original complaint about David's presence into a broader moral confrontation about values, respect, dignity, and appropriate behavior in shared social spaces where people from different backgrounds had to coexist peacefully. "This is exactly what's wrong with airlines today," she announced to the cabin at large, as if addressing a courtroom of supporters or delivering an important policy speech to a legislative assembly about the decline of American civilization. "No standards, no respect for premium customers who literally pay the bills that keep these companies operating and employing people. I'm surrounded by crying babies, elderly passengers who should be flying economy class, maintenance workers who don't understand professional boundaries, and other travelers who think they can lecture me about behavior." The cabin fell into stunned silence as Margaret's comprehensive statement of prejudice and discrimination hung in the air like toxic smoke, revealing the breathtaking scope and systematic nature of her bigotry against virtually everyone she encountered who didn't meet her arbitrary standards of age, economic status, or social acceptability.
The confrontation were visibly shocked and morally outraged by the breadth of her prejudice. David had heard more than enough, far more than enough. But he also recognized that this moment represented something much larger and more significant than one passenger's character flaws or personal prejudices. This was a perfect teachable moment, an unprecedented opportunity to address systemic issues that plagued not just his airline, but the entire service industry and society's broader treatment of working people. He reached discreetly into his shirt pocket and activated his phone's recording application, a standard practice he had developed during his undercover inspections to document safety violations, policy failures, employee misconduct,
or, in this case, passenger behavior that violated federal anti-discrimination regulations and basic human decency standards. If Margaret wanted to continue her public verbal assault and comprehensive display of prejudice, he would ensure that every word was documented with crystal-clear digital audio quality that could be used for training purposes, legal documentation, policy development, and educational initiatives. "You know what I think needs to happen here right now?" Margaret continued, apparently oblivious to the increasingly hostile atmosphere she had created and seemingly energized by what she perceived as an opportunity to demonstrate her authority and importance to a captive audience of fellow travelers. "I think I need to speak directly to someone in real authority who actually understands customer service standards, passenger rights, and what premium cabin travel is supposed to provide. This is completely unacceptable treatment of a valued customer who has invested significant money in this airline over many years of loyal patronage." Sarah nodded with professional composure, though David could clearly see the stress, tension, and moral conflict in her posture and facial expressions as she tried to manage a situation that had escalated far beyond normal passenger service protocols into territory that potentially violated company policies, federal regulations, and basic human decency standards. "I can certainly contact the purser for you, ma'am, or I can ask the captain to come speak with you if you would prefer to discuss your concerns with the highest-ranking crew member on board this aircraft." "Not the purser," Margaret snapped, with the dismissive tone of someone who believed that middle management wasn't sufficiently important or authoritative to address her complaints or validate her superior status. "I want to speak directly to the captain immediately. I want this man," she pointed at David with theatrical emphasis and obvious contempt, "formally reported for making passengers uncomfortable, creating a hostile cabin environment, and potentially violating safety protocols." She paused for dramatic effect, building toward what she clearly intended as the climax of her performance, and the moment when her authority would be definitively established. "And I want him removed from this cabin immediately, regardless of whatever cleaning duties he thinks he needs to complete or whatever work schedule he's supposed to follow." David continued his methodical cleaning routine, but his movements were now deliberately slow and thorough, designed to give Margaret plenty of time to fully express her attitudes and prejudices, while his phone recorded every word with perfect digital clarity. He had learned during his years in corporate management that people revealed their deepest character flaws most completely when they believed they held power over others, and when they assumed there would be no consequences for their behavior or statements. "Just look at him," Margaret announced to the cabin at large, gesturing toward David as if he were an exhibit in a museum of social problems or workplace safety violations. "He's not even responding appropriately to legitimate customer complaints and concerns. He probably doesn't speak English well enough to understand what I'm saying, or he's mentally compromised in some way that makes him unsuitable for this kind of work environment." David was a third-generation American whose English was not only grammatically flawless, but enhanced by advanced education, decades of public speaking experience in corporate and academic settings, and extensive international business negotiations conducted in multiple languages.
But he understood the ugly implications behind Margaret's assumptions. She was systematically layering ethnic prejudice and cognitive discrimination on top of her already established patterns of age bias and class contempt, creating a comprehensive portrait of bigotry that revealed the true depth and scope of her character defects. Furthermore, Margaret continued, warming to her theme and apparently enjoying the attention she was receiving from her captive audience of fellow passengers, "I have serious questions about whether this airline maintains proper hiring standards, safety protocols, and employee oversight procedures." She gestured broadly, as if addressing a corporate board meeting or government regulatory hearing about aviation safety and industry standards. "This man looks like he should be in a nursing home receiving medical care and assistance with daily living activities, not working on commercial aircraft where passenger safety and security could potentially be at risk. It's probably a significant liability issue that management needs to investigate and address immediately. David's jaw muscles tightened involuntarily as he listened to his own company's employment practices being systematically criticized and misrepresented by someone who clearly had no understanding of aviation safety requirements, federal employment law, age discrimination regulations, or basic human resources management. He had personally designed SkyHigh's hiring and employment standards, creating one of the most inclusive, fair, and legally compliant programs in the entire transportation industry, while maintaining the highest possible safety, competency, and performance requirements that exceeded Federal Aviation Administration guidelines. The bitter irony that Margaret was using his own company's commitment to age diversity and inclusive employment practices as ammunition for her discriminatory attack was almost unbearable. But it also provided perfect documentation of exactly the kind of prejudice that his policies were specifically designed to prevent, address, and eliminate. Captain James Morrison appeared in the first-class cabin, drawn by crew reports of escalating passenger conflict and the obvious tension that was affecting the entire forward section of the aircraft. David knew Captain Morrison exceptionally well. He had personally interviewed, hired, and promoted him 5 years earlier and considered him one of their most skilled, professional, and morally principled pilots. Morrison possessed the kind of calm judgment, ethical clarity, and leadership skills that made him perfect for handling complex situations involving difficult passengers, crew conflicts, and the delicate balance between customer service obligations and safety protocols. Morrison quickly surveyed the scene with the trained assessment skills of someone who had been taught to evaluate emergency situations and make critical decisions under extreme pressure. He could immediately see the obvious tension in the cabin atmosphere, the uncomfortable expressions on passengers' faces, the stress visible in his crew members' body language, and the clear signs that a routine service situation had evolved into something much more serious and potentially problematic. "I understand there's a concern here that needs to be addressed professionally and resolved quickly," Captain Morrison said with the diplomatic tone that senior airline personnel learned from managing delicate passenger relations issues. "How can I resolve this situation in a way that ensures everyone's comfort, safety, and satisfaction?" "Yes, Captain, there absolutely is a very serious concern that requires immediate attention and definitive resolution," Margaret declared triumphantly, apparently believing that the arrival of higher authority would automatically validate her position and result in immediate satisfaction of all her demands. "This cleaning person has been making multiple passengers extremely uncomfortable with his inappropriate presence in the first-class cabin. He appears to be significantly too old to be performing this kind of physically demanding work safely, and he's not responding appropriately to legitimate customer feedback, concerns, and requests for accommodation." Captain Morrison looked carefully at David, who was continuing his work with quiet, professional competence and obvious skill. There was something subtly familiar about the maintenance worker's bearing, posture, and demeanor, something in the way he carried himself that suggested confidence, authority, and extensive experience despite his humble uniform and circumstances. Morrison couldn't quite identify the source of his intuitive recognition, but his professional instincts were telling him that there were hidden dimensions to this situation that weren't immediately apparent on the surface.
"Sir," Morrison addressed David with the respectful tone he used when speaking to all airline employees, regardless of their position or apparent rank. "Could you please step aside for a moment while we discuss and hopefully resolve whatever concerns have been raised?" David looked up from his cleaning duties, making direct, sustained eye contact with his captain for the first time during the entire confrontation. "Of course, Captain Morrison. I'm happy to cooperate with whatever you think would be best for resolving this situation and ensuring passenger comfort." Something in David's voice, tone, and manner of speaking made Morrison pause and examine him more closely. The response carried subtle undertones of authority, education, and professional experience that seemed inconsistent with his apparent position and circumstances. There was also the telling detail that David had used Morrison's correct name without having seen his identification badge or received a formal introduction. Margaret, meanwhile, was building toward what she clearly intended as the dramatic crescendo of her entire performance, apparently believing that she had successfully enlisted the captain's support and was now free to deliver the comprehensive critique and demands that she had been preparing throughout the confrontation. Captain Morrison, this is precisely the kind of systemic problem that's destroying the reputation and service standards of professional commercial aviation, she announced with the confidence and authority of someone delivering an important speech to a corporate shareholders meeting or government regulatory committee. Airlines hiring people who should have retired years ago, probably paying the minimum wage with inadequate supervision, insufficient training programs, and completely inadequate oversight of their interactions with premium passengers who have paid significant money for quality service experiences. She turned to address the entire first-class cabin, as if conducting a public seminar on airline management, customer service standards, and industry best practices. I fly first class exclusively because I expect and deserve a certain standard of service quality and environmental experience. That standard should absolutely not include having to watch elderly janitors shuffling around my seat while I'm trying to enjoy the premium experience that I've paid extra money to receive. David straightened slowly from his cleaning position, the cloth still in his hand, as the recording on his phone captured 23 minutes of continuous verbal abuse, systematic discrimination, character assassination, and comprehensive prejudice against multiple categories of people. The audio documentation was thorough, legally admissible, and utterly damning, providing clear evidence of behavior that violated not only basic standards of human decency, but also federal transportation regulations regarding passenger conduct, discrimination, and harassment in commercial aviation environments. The time had arrived to end this elaborate charade and reveal the truth that would transform this ugly confrontation into an unforgettable lesson about respect, dignity, consequences, and the dangers of making assumptions about people based on their appearance or apparent social status. "Miss Williams," David said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin despite its measured conversational tone. "What did you just say to me? Are you actually trying to speak to me directly now?" "I said Miss Williams. That is your correct name, isn't it? Margaret Elizabeth Williams, Senior Business Consultant from Chicago, Illinois. Platinum Frequent Flyer member number 47729. Customer since 2019. Total account value $27,412 over 6 years of service." Margaret's eyes widened dramatically as she tried to process how a cleaning person could possibly know her complete name, her professional title, her city of residence, her precise frequent flyer membership details, or her exact financial history with the airline. None of that information was printed on her boarding pass, visible on any documents she had displayed, or accessible to maintenance personnel through normal channels. David reached into his cleaning cart and pulled out a small leather portfolio that he had kept carefully hidden beneath his supplies and equipment throughout the flight preparation process. From it, he extracted several items: his official company identification badge, his corporate business card, his pilot's license, and his master's degree in aerospace engineering from Stanford University. "My name is David Richardson," he said clearly, holding up the identification materials so Margaret could read them easily, and other passengers could observe the official company logos, photographs, and credentials. "I am the founder, majority owner, and chief executive officer of SkyHigh Airlines." The silence that followed was profound, complete, and absolutely deafening. Margaret's face underwent a rapid, dramatic series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning recognition, horror, shock, and finally a kind of paralyzed terror as the full magnitude of her catastrophic mistake became undeniably clear. Every passenger in first class stared in fascination as they realized they were witnessing one of the most spectacular reversals of fortune and power dynamics that any of them had ever seen in their lives. Captain Morrison's eyes widened with immediate recognition and understanding. Mr. Richardson, sir, I had absolutely no idea you were conducting an inspection today. I sincerely apologize for not recognizing you immediately when I arrived. That was precisely the entire point of the exercise, Captain Morrison, David said with calm professionalism and obvious satisfaction with how his undercover operation had unfolded. These covert inspections are only valuable and meaningful if they reveal authentic behavior and genuine attitudes, rather than the artificial performance people display when they know management is watching and evaluating them.
He looked directly at Margaret, who appeared to be experiencing significant difficulty processing what had just happened and what it meant for her immediate future, her professional reputation, and potentially her entire life. Ms. Williams, I believe you had some very specific concerns about my qualifications, my professional competence, my age-related fitness for employment, and my presence in this cabin? Would you like to discuss those concerns now that you have a more complete understanding of exactly who you've been talking to for the past 25 minutes? Margaret's mouth opened and closed repeatedly without producing any sound, like a fish removed from water struggling to breathe. The supreme confidence and aggressive authority that had carried her through 25 minutes of verbal abuse and public humiliation of a service worker had evaporated completely, replaced by the dawning realization that she had just committed what amounted to career and social suicide in front of witnesses and audio recording equipment. I had no way of knowing, she finally managed to whisper, her voice barely audible above the ambient aircraft noise. David held up his phone, displaying the recording application that had been running continuously throughout their entire interaction, documenting every insult, every discriminatory comment, every moment of prejudice and cruelty. Ms. Williams, let me help clarify the situation for you and for everyone else who has been forced to witness this unfortunate display, he said with the calm authority of someone who had spent decades in leadership positions and knew exactly how to handle complex situations with both firmness and fairness. Without waiting for her response, David pressed play on his phone, and Margaret's voice filled the cabin with perfect audio clarity. You look like you should have retired years ago, not crawling around cleaning commercial aircraft. This is clearly a job for younger people who have the physical energy and mental capacity to do it properly. Margaret's face turned pale as she heard her own words played back to an audience that now included not only fellow passengers, but also the CEO of the airline, the flight captain, and senior crew members. I had no way of knowing, she finally managed to whisper, her voice barely audible above the ambient aircraft noise. Please stop playing that, Margaret whispered desperately, but David continued the audio playback demonstration. The recordings continued, each one more damning than the last, revealing the full scope of her prejudice and cruelty. With each clip, Margaret seemed to physically shrink, and other passengers watched in complete fascination as one of the most comprehensive exposures of character flaws that any of them had ever witnessed continued to unfold. The revelation was complete. The CEO had been subjected to 25 minutes of systematic abuse and discrimination, all while maintaining perfect composure and documenting everything. Margaret Williams, who had believed herself to be exercising power over a vulnerable service worker, had instead revealed herself to be exactly the kind of person that David Richardson had built his company to protect against. The aftermath would be swift, decisive, and permanent. Margaret's platinum status was revoked immediately. Her behavior was documented and shared with other airlines. The incident became a training case study that would be used for years to come. But more importantly, it demonstrated that authentic leadership sometimes meant putting on a maintenance uniform and showing the world what dignity looked like, even in the face of systematic abuse and discrimination.